Mirsa, Indonesia resmi memangku G20 presidensi yang akan berlangsung tahun depan 2022 yang rencananya akan berlangsung di Bali. Dan tongkat estafet ini telah diserahkan pada saat penutupan KTT G20 di Roma, Italia, Oktober lalu. Ini artinya pemirsa, seluruh mata dunia akan tertuju kepada Indonesia selaku tuan rumah untuk pertama kalinya dalam sejarah G20 berdiri. Lalu bagaimana pandangan dunia terhadap peran Indonesia di kancah dunia nantinya? Saya akan mengajak Anda untuk berdiskusi, untuk berbincang dengan mantan Perdana Menteri Inggris, Tony Blair. And it's such a pleasure for me to have you here, Mr. Blair. How are you?
I'm well. I'm all the better for being in Indonesia. I like it a lot.
You like it a lot, okay. And it's such a pleasure for me to have you here, and thank you for joining us. And Mr. Blair, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a moment for Indonesia. The first time country in Southeast Asia will hold the G20 presidency. And you are, as the leader of the world, a former British Prime Minister, and also the Executive Chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Of course, I believe that you have your own vision about what Indonesia can seize the opportunity by holding the G20 presidency.
Look, I think Indonesia is the right country in the right place at the right time and with the right people. So it's an immense opportunity. The G20, because there's I think a strong international perception that Indonesia has really joined the top table of nations in recent years. It's highly respected. The ambitions both of the president and the government, but I think of the people, are in line with the way the world's changing.
Yeah.
So for all of these reasons, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Now, it's important to make use of that opportunity, but the opportunity is there. And I think it's a very exciting time, actually, to be in Indonesia and to watch the progress that's been made.
And why it is so important, and why it is the right time for Indonesia to perhaps double down its efforts in terms of international outreach and also international economy diplomacy at this time?
So I think there are a number of reasons why Indonesia is a very interesting country right now. First of all, obviously, its size, 270, 280 million people. It's the largest Muslim population on earth. It's a country with enormous natural deposits and commodities, particularly those that are going to be vital, like nickel and so on for electrification, for the climate change. Indonesia's probably got some of the most important carbon credit possibilities of any nation on earth because of your forests, because of your mangroves, because of the peatland. So, and it's also a country that is developing fast, and it's in a world in which the world needs to cooperate, but it's having to cooperate around COVID, around climate change, when there's also at the same time this geopolitical rivalry between America on the one side and China on the other. And Indonesia is again in, I think, a unique position in this part of the world in which it wants strong relations with both, but it wants to make sure that the world has its own independent view.
Yeah, as you see that Indonesia has important role in order to reducing the carbon emission and tackling the climate change?
Yeah, for Indonesia, climate change is obviously at one level, as with everyone, a threat, but it's also for Indonesia specifically an opportunity.
Yeah.
Because you've got the opportunity to develop enormous amounts of renewable energy. So,
Exactly.
I was just hearing in my meetings today about the enormous availability of hydropower and of solar power, in Kalimantan and obviously then tidal power in other parts of Indonesia. You've got a huge potential for clean energy, and then you've got the best carbon sinks in the world probably here in Indonesia.
So that's a big opportunity one for
Huge
Indonesia, right?
opportunity.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is you're going to create internationally a set of carbon credit markets that are going to be really, really important for the future. And Indonesia can play an essential role in establishing that market and participating in it.
Exactly. Okay, now we're talking about the several summits that throughout this year being held, from the G20 as the first face-to-face meeting for the G20 within the pandemic season, and then the G20 in Rome, Italy, and also the COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. Can you share with us what is the key points of those events for the world and also for Indonesia in particular?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is that the G7 in the UK, then the G20 in Rome, and then you had the climate change conference in Glasgow in the UK. So all of those conferences put in place quite a strong set of directions for the world on COVID and how we handle future pandemics and the global health architecture, and then on climate change, some very ambitious targets and certain specific areas where real progress was made. But I think the great opportunity for Indonesia is that when you come forward to next October, by then we will, I think, really have much more data around COVID, what's happened, the success of the vaccinations, what we need to do for the future. So I think you will be able, in the G20 on COVID, to take the world's global health architecture a whole stage forward, because we're going to need special systems of funding, we're going to need a better way of researching, inventing, producing, distributing vaccines. And I think the technology is going to develop a huge amount so that we will be able to do more than just COVID vaccines. So this is why next year, the end of next year will be very important for global health. And then on climate change, I think again, it will be a moment in time when people say, well, have the ambitions that were set out in Glasgow, as those really resulted in the actions that we need from government.
Are you quite satisfied with what being result in Glasgow? When we're talking about the net zero emission, when the time was going to be
Look,
reached?
What people always say about any of these summits is, well, we needed to do more.
Yes.
And of course we do need to do much more. But the truth is, Glasgow did make real progress in certain areas, and I think it would be foolish not to accept that. You know, we made progress in deforestation, in methane emissions, in climate finance. Now, again, on climate finance, I think Indonesia has an opportunity to take that a whole step further. Because at the moment, it's not clear to me either that the public money will flow in the way it should, the 100 billion a year.
Based on the Paris Agreement.
Right, so I think this will be a big factor for next year to make sure that that commitment really is going to happen in 2023. But then I think the other thing is that the key to this is mobilizing private sector finance. I mean, you've got trillions of that wanting to go into climate change projects, but they need to be made investable, and then there needs to be a way of mobilizing that finance.
Ya, kita harus jeda dulu sejenak. Perbincangan dengan Tony Blair akan kami lanjutkan usai jeda sesaat lagi.
Yeah, no, you know, it's been very impressive, but the fact is you will want in the future to make sure you've got vaccine production here.
Anda kembali di wawancara khusus bersama mantan Perdana Menteri Inggris, Tony Blair. Mr. Blair, maybe you also heard about the divided countries, but in terms when the goal will be reached, which is in 2050 or 2060, or most of the countries said in the middle of the century. So how are we going to reach the time limit for the zero net?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So there are, in my view, number one, we need to make big progress in the next 10 years, right? Because if we don't, then the emissions carry on piling up, and then it's going to be much harder to bring them down to net zero by 2050. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to develop practical mechanisms. So the climate finance, it's not enough just to say, let's invest in clean energy. So in many of the countries my institute works in, we work in about 30 countries around the world, they have potential projects for big renewable energy. But it needs changes in regulatory frameworks, it needs underwriting by international financial institutions. It's not as simple as just saying, here's all this money.
What I kept it from your statement is, it is important also to think about the short-term solution other than the long-term solution
Right.
to reach the net zero emission, right?
Absolutely. And that's why things like deforestation are very important.
Yeah.
And, sure, there are some longer-term solutions, for example, around hydrogen and so on, which would be very important, carbon capture and storage, the whole series of new technologies. But in the short term, we've got to do everything we can to make a difference now.
Yes, exactly. And it also needs take two to tangos between the developed country and developing country, right? Based on the Paris Agreement, there's a financial support for the developing country, 100 billion you said before. But how is the realization of that commitment right now?
Absolutely. So let me give you a specific example that came out of COP26. So there's an agreement by a group of countries, including the UK, to help South Africa quickly get off its coal addiction, because it's a large amount of energy in South Africa is produced from coal. So this is a specific plan. And that's why I think climate change, despite what some people say, you don't have to persuade the leaders anymore that it's a big problem and they need to act. But
Because we already have the same vision about it.
Yeah, but you've got to give them practical plans because, by the way, just to take the UK, for us to meet our targets on electric vehicles and taking the gas boilers out of the houses, domestic houses, and putting in heat pumps, the effect of that will be we will have to, over the next 10 to 15 years in the UK, double our electricity production, double it, and not using fossil fuel. So that's...
How can we compare that with the
So it's going to be,
countries?
You've got to have a practical plan to deal with that. And likewise, we know in Indonesia, for example, you've now got very ambitious targets, but these will require a lot of hard work in order to get there. And you've got to give political leaders politically sellable solutions. You can't tell them to adopt some unrealistic program that's going to mean they can't get elected.
That's the point we get from that. And talking about the health architecture of the health structure, you said we are in the second year facing the pandemic, the COVID-19. How do you see the world confronting the pandemic disease regarding to the availability of the vaccine for the COVID-19?
Yeah, so what COVID-19 has exposed are the weaknesses in global health architecture and the weaknesses in individual countries. So I don't think, you've actually done a great job in recent times in Indonesia and in dealing with it.
Pushing it, double it, and pushing it for the second booster for the vaccinated.
It's been very impressive, but the fact is you will want in the future to make sure you've got vaccine production here. And I think that, so there are lots of countries, we, for example, have got a weakness in the UK around some of the PPE issues around, healthcare and so on. So we'll want to solve those. So countries will want to solve gaps in their own system. But then for the global architecture, we have to be able to get vaccines out for a future pandemic, not in 15 months, but in 3 months.
How can it's possibly done in 3 months?
You can if you organize it. So what does it need? First of all, it needs a brilliant system of global health surveillance. We need to spot when a new pandemic is starting. We need to be able to sequence the genome. We need to be able to research to get the vaccine or the therapeutic that's going to deal with it. And then you need to test it much faster. You need to get it out quicker, and you need to distribute it more fairly. So these are big changes that are necessary. But here's the thing that we've got to be very careful of. With COVID-19, it's a very dangerous disease. If you've got flu here, right, and the plague here, okay, COVID-19 is kind of here, okay? It's closer towards the flu, because the mortality rates are quite limited.
Quite high,
Yeah. But the truth is, it shut down the world. Supposing you get a pandemic, which is closer to this end of the spectrum, right? So it's much more serious, but not less transmissible.
Okay.
Okay.
And the point is?
The point is, then you're going to have to move far faster.
Okay.
Because you can't afford to have a situation where the disease is spreading for a year or 50 months without a vaccine.
But you said that it's depend on each country policy, right? We know each country policy is different regarding to COVID vaccine. Not only policy, also the people. As we know that you are saying the vaccination is a civic duty, but in every different country they have a, what we say that
Anti-vax.
struggling, the anti-vaccine
but I mean,
sides,
This is, look, one of the things that you need also is to get the top people in the world coming together in the medical science and the health community, and just lay out for people the evidence. Now, look, some people are always, it doesn't matter what the facts are, they've got their own, you know what the modern world's like. You've got facts and you've got feelings. And sometimes people prefer the feelings to the facts. But in a rational world, the truth is the vaccines have been our only hope of getting through COVID.
Exactly, Apa pesan mantan Perdana Menteri Inggris Tony Blair untuk generasi muda di Indonesia? Temukan jawabannya usai jeda sesaat lagi.
I visited Bali.
Okay.
And then I visited some of the islands as well. Flores and where the Komodo dragons were and so on. And it's...
Kita sampai di bagian akhir perbincangan saya hari ini dengan mantan Perdana Menteri Inggris Tony Blair. How do you see as a country Indonesia manage the pandemic issue from your perspective, Mr. Blair?
I think you managed it very well given the challenges you had, because people had to go out and source vaccine. See, for the UK we had a large vaccine manufacturer, and we had a vaccine, AstraZeneca vaccine, and then frankly, we had a big problems around the world with the Serum Institute in India, that is the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world, and was going to supply a lot of the world from that manufacturing capability. But then it became very difficult because India, with a very large population, got this second wave of the pandemic and then had to use a lot of the vaccine for India. Anyway, I think given all the challenges you had, you've done an amazing job on it, actually, and you've got a large proportion of your population now vaccinated.
Almost more than 50%.
Yeah, no, well, that's...
And starting to get the second boost for the vaccine.
Yeah, and then you'll have the booster.
Yeah.
And the boosters are important because the evidence certainly from the UK is what's keeping us in a position of being very open. If you go to the UK, you would barely notice a pandemic. So we're very open. At the moment, we've got to watch the situation, and I personally suggested some changes that we might make to our policy to accelerate how we're doing things. But on the whole, I think the UK, because it's got the boosters out early, those boosters, it's a strange thing, but this is what the medical people explained to me, but your third shot, the booster, increases your immune response something like 10 times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's a massive increase.
We're talking about, you also are the executive chairman of the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And as we know, your foundation involved in more than 20 countries, if I'm not mistaken.
It's about 30 now,
Yeah. And how is your institute role amid the pandemic season, especially to facing the COVID-19, and especially for Indonesia? Will we see you more here in Indonesia with your foundation or something like that?
Well, I'd love to be here in Indonesia. We have a presence actually in this region. It would be great to do that. But what we've done through COVID as an institute is we've tried to help governments with practical policy making. So, for example, in the UK, we tried to provide advice as to why we should do mass testing, then why we should give everyone the first dose of the vaccine, even if it's a 2-dose, get people at least with the first dose. And we've done that using a range of experts from the UK, but also from around the world, who help advise us. And so my institute works on helping governments govern more effectively. And because I think the big difference in the world today, everything else is mobile. Capital's mobile, technology's mobile, people are mobile, but the one thing that isn't mobile is government, right? So the countries that succeed are those that take the right policy decisions from a government perspective.
Mr. Blair, we're talking about as you have empowered youth and the next generation. I know that you have concern with that case. What is your key message, perhaps, for Indonesia, next future leaders, or for everyone who's watching our interview right now in all Indonesia archipelago?
I think my message to people in Indonesia is that you've got an amazing opportunity. I mean, the country is just it's just at that inflection point when, you know, you're going to become one of the major powers in the world. And if provided young people get the access to education, provided they understand the way the world's changing, provided they keep open-minded to the world and its opportunities, you have in Indonesia, if you're a young person, you know, yep, I know all the challenges you will have at the moment, but in the years to come, you're going to be one of the big players in the world. And that's a very exciting thing. I mean, a country like mine in Britain, I mean, we've got to forge a new path now, because where we were 100 years ago is obviously not where we are today in terms of the way the politics of the world has changed. But you're in a situation where, you know, potentially you are amongst, they're right up with the top economies and therefore with the top echelons of political leadership.
Okay, I underline, you said that we have to be open to the world, especially for Indonesia, right? That's why it is important Indonesia to be active in international outreach also.
Absolutely, because the one thing that is clear is that the world works today by connectivity.
Okay.
You know, the more connected you are, the more open-minded you are. You know, that's why I always say to people, prejudice against people of this faith or this race or this nation, or prejudice against women, you know, these prejudices hold nations back. So the most important thing is the world today belongs to the creative and the open-minded. Okay. So if you're a young person, get as much of that as you can, as much of the education that allows you to connect with the world, to, you know, if you're able to, not all young people will be able to actually experience different parts of the world, learn about it. Because the one thing I've learned since leaving office and working in many different parts of the world, not just my own country, is that basically everyone wants the same things. But the ones that succeed are the ones that are constantly curious about the changing world.
The one who constantly curious about the changing of the world. That's an interesting point. So the message for Indonesian viewers right now, that's the key point. Be open-minded and be curious.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Because it's a fascinating world out there, but you've got to learn about it.
Well, one last question only. I know that you're back and forth visiting Indonesia. The first time you were here in 2006 when you are in the office.
Yes.
And then a few times you come back in Indonesia. Do you have any, can you share with us your story? What is the most remarkable or maybe the memorable things that you remember about Indonesia? What is so intriguing about Indonesia?
Well, I do remember, I mean, I should talk about work, but I'll actually talk about holiday. Because I visited Bali.
Okay.
And then I visited some of the islands as well. Flores and where the Komodo dragons were and so on. And it's the thing is about Indonesia is the diversity of the country is the thing that is so amazing. And you realize it's a vast country. Yep. It's got all sorts of different elements to it. Extraordinary biodiversity. So it's a fascinating place to come and visit. And it's just a long way from my home.
Well, I hope you have a good rest on your way back home then.
Thank you.
Enjoy your flight back home. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everything that you said will empower and inspire all the Indonesian viewers that are watching our interview right now. Thank you again so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.